Good morning. It's wonderful that we can meet, even though it's virtually this year, to acknowledge World Stroke Day. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional country of the Awabakal and Worimi peoples. Here in the city of Newcastle, or wherever you may be coming from, I'd like to acknowledge our traditional owners. We recognise their cultural heritage, beliefs, and continuing relationship with the land upon which we meet, and I pay sincere respects to elders past, present, and future. It's my genuine pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the City of Newcastle to this morning's virtual morning tea to mark World Stroke Day. I would like to start by acknowledging the Colcott family, who were integral here in Newcastle in helping me establish this international event. It brings awareness to stroke and stroke survivors. So thank you so much, Barbara, Ruth, and Mary Colcott, for your advocacy. I would also like to acknowledge our wonderful partners and guest speakers we have here for you this morning. In particular, our keynote speaker, Emma G, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us here today. Thank you, Emma. As one of the nation's biggest killers and leading cause of disability in Australia, actually killing more women than breast cancer and more men than prostate cancer, it is really vital we gather to discuss the effects of stroke, raise awareness about its treatment and prevention. Thank you so much to those behind the scenes who worked to ensure that this event still went ahead despite the COVID-19 pandemic. This has highlighted the importance of presenting to hospital early with stroke. This brings me to the theme of this year's World Stroke Day 2021. Minutes can save lives. When somebody has a stroke, every second that passes is crucial. As brain tissue and millions of neurons begin to fade away, time is precious. The World Stroke Organisation's #PreciousTime campaign aims to raise awareness of the signs of stroke and the benefits of timely access to emergency medical care. Today, we will hear about the importance of time and navigating access to support. City of Newcastle is committed to increasing access for survivors of stroke and their families, not least of which through the support of this insightful annual event to participate with Stroke Register Hunter. It is such a vital piece of research and information. That data that is collected has helped innovate here in Newcastle and the Hunter region, life-saving interventions for sufferers of stroke and their families, which makes a huge amount of difference, not only to the outcomes in hospital, but also to their quality of life. I know my family has been affected with stroke and the flow-on effects from family members that have had strokes, and I know how devastating that can be and what a long road to recovery. Plus, I'm also very well aware of some of the really long-term effects, like vascular dementia, another debilitating disease in our community. So I do come to you with a lot of passion and some history, and I would just like to again acknowledge the Colcott family, as well as all the partners here at the City of Newcastle, particularly HMRI and the University of Newcastle, and the research foundations that have banded together to make sure we shine a light on stroke, its cause and effect, early intervention and treatment, and also the importance of rehabilitation. On that note, I will hand over to Stroke Research Register Hunter Manager, Gillian Mason, who will kick off today's program. I'd also just like to personally thank Gillian for involvement in this event over many years, but her day-to-day diligence and work in this field has genuinely improved the lives of hundreds, if not thousands of people right across the country, and particularly here in Newcastle and the Hunter. So thank you, Gillian, for your work and your dedication in this field. Once again, thank you for joining us today, and I really hope you enjoy today's program.
Thank you. I'll say goodbye so that you can get backstage. Now, we are broadcasting from an interesting platform this morning, live to you. I'm really pleased that we can do it, even though I'd prefer that we could get together in person. Of course, this is the safest way to connect with you. And I just want to let you know that even next year when we change things up, I'm saying next year with optimism, and we can have face-to-face events again and actually have an actual cup of coffee with you, not a virtual one, we will still make sure that we offer an option to come in virtually. So I wanted to let you know that I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to work with about 720 Stroke Research Register members at the moment. And so most of them are in Newcastle, but there is about 100 of you who are scattered around the rest of the country. And we want to make sure you have the same opportunity to connect to our events as everyone else that's local. So yeah, again, just to reintroduce myself, I'm Gillian Mason. My pronouns are she and her. You can call me Jill. For anyone that's blind or visually impaired watching, I'm a white woman with longer hair than usual because I haven't been to a hairdresser. Got black rimmed glasses and I'm wearing a colourful shirt. So as our Lord Mayor acknowledged, we are connected here and I'm broadcasting from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land. It's here that the Pambalong clan of the Awabakal people are the traditional owners of this place. And on behalf of everyone and everyone coming in from the lands where you are, I want to pay my respects to the elders past, present and future and acknowledge their spiritual connection to country. So please put in the comments, say hello, let us know where you're from. And yeah, it would be really great to see who's joining us. So yeah, I'm joining this stream from my home office, which kind of hasn't recovered from the primary school remote learning crisis of 2020. It's been overrun by a jungle of houseplants. And it's been a pleasure to be able to keep working in stroke research, even though I haven't been able to be at HMRI. We've been delivering all sorts of telehealth trials to make sure that people still can have access to stroke care and rehabilitation services. But soon, later in the program, we've got Dr. Jusup Kim. He works as part of the Australian Clinical Stroke Registry, which is a different register to ours, but it's looking at clinical outcomes and lots of data from people all around the country. So he's going to talk a little bit about how the COVID crisis has affected stroke care in Australia. We've got Dr. Carlos Garcia Esperon, a neurologist from John Hunter Hospital, and he's going to talk about the fantastic New South Wales telestroke service. And then after that, we're going to jump into a panel discussion where we'll talk about different challenges, successes, tips, and hacks for returning to work after a stroke. So that's kind of what's in store. For now, I'd like to first just kind of orientate you to how this is all working. So during the live stream, there's some of you watching on Facebook. I can already see that the Calcots are watching, which that's beautiful. Welcome. Patrick Clemenson's watching. Letitia from the Gold Coast is on board. When you put something in the comments, that's where you can ask your question. So if you're on Facebook or if you're on YouTube, do say something. And in fact, if you've got an interesting question, we can actually pop it up on screen. So Barbara, hello, you're now in the screen. If you've been a Q&A watcher in the past, like I have, I always wanted to get my tweets on the screen. So if I can give you a little bit of that thrill here today, then brilliant. But yeah, do let us know where you're coming in from and feel free to ask questions because we can put them to our panelists. Other housekeeping things, take full advantage of the catering. So we're sorry we can't actually, help you out with a piece of cake or a cup of coffee, but walk around. This is going to be an informal event, so don't feel like you're stuck to your screen. This year's World Stroke Day campaign, we talked about the focus is on saving precious time, and we've got to remember to act fast anytime that there's a stroke. I'm not going to go into lots of details because Dr. Carlos will talk to you more about the life and brain-saving treatments that are available at New South Wales and in fact Australian hospitals. But we've got to remember that time is precious. So we really appreciate your time in being here. So thought I would just start by talking about the Stroke Research Register why we created it in the first place. And some of that is to do with time. And we've got lots of dedicated and passionate researchers working on clinical trials, but the research shows us that about half of them, not just ours, but half of clinical trials worldwide, they don't meet their recruitment targets. What that means is that a trial will be set up, it might be set to run across 2 years or something like that. And in fact, connecting with enough people with those health problems that could take part in the trials is really difficult. And there's lots of reasons for that. One effort that we're making to try and solve that problem for stroke research, to make sure that the stroke research here in the Hunter happens quickly and that those findings can be implemented and put into usual stroke care. We created the Stroke Research Register in May 2019. Now, I just want to show you a little bit of our progress. You have to bear with me while I share this slideshow. Okay, great. So yeah, we started in we didn't start in May 2019. We started at the end of 2016 with the Stroke Research Register. But we did survey you all in 2019. And I know that seems like such a long time ago already, but I just wanted to share some of the results of that so that you can find out how we're using your feedback, because we all are working together to make sure that the stroke research goes ahead quickly and that it's the research that means something to you if you're living with stroke. So we co-designed a survey a couple of years ago, as I'd said, with a whole bunch of you, based on what we'd learned from talking to you. And in order to get the survey out there, we did connect with a couple of local legends. So here's Dave. There was a few of you involved in the social media campaign around this. We really appreciate that, and we loved seeing your faces. But we had just over 450 people get in touch and do the survey, which is not surprising when there's local talent like Noel in all of the marketing copy. So we loved that. I wanted to let you know that the results of the survey, they're kind of not surprising. What you told us was that it would be easier to participate in research if you don't have to drive, if you don't have to worry about parking. So we've put things in place to make sure that if you attend a research study at HMRI, you don't have to pay for parking. There's a car park put aside for you. We've tested lots of different telehealth approaches. And also you told us that you just want more information in an easy to understand format. But then in doing that, you don't want it dumbed down. So yes, we're making efforts to make sure that you get access to clinical trial results in terms of the scientific papers, as well as we want to do more of these sorts of events so that we can just talk to you about what we found. And you're not lumped with trying to read a 17-page scientific research article as the only way that you can receive the information from that. So you said that you wanted to get involved because you wanted to help others, because you wanted to help yourself. And as I was talking about, you just want to make sure that there's enough information in a way that's just actually nice to read or to take in. So we talked about this. We talked about also, of course, you don't want to take part in research studies that aren't relevant to you. And I'll let you know what you told us was relevant to you and what you would like us to be focusing more on. But one thing that struck me in your survey responses was that we really need to be investing in making an effort to be generally friendlier and to approach this research work in partnership with you. And so we've taken steps to make sure that we're including people who have had stroke in research teams. If you're watching, if you've taken part in a trial and you think that you would love to be involved in, informing researchers about how it might work best for you in the real world, or if you've got some ideas about ways that it can actually just feel nicer for you when you're involved in a trial. And I say nicer, not to kind of be patronizing at all, but sometimes participating in trials where there's lots of assessments and we're kind of pointing out over and over again what all of the problems you're facing are, it can actually, people are telling us that it can feel uncomfortable. And we want to try and make sure the experience feels like it's worthwhile, and that for your efforts, and that we're, working together and putting together something that's going to feel accessible, that's going to feel inclusive, and that feels like we're working together to solve problems. So one of our survey respondents told us that what you really want is you want an approach that feels like you're meeting in the middle, that you're leveraging lived experiences and building trusting and empowering pathways forwards together. So that's very much what we're working on doing. There's a beautiful picture of Zaina and some of her grandchildren. We're taking steps to make sure that trials can be a bit more flexible, that you don't have to travel. You want relevant research and also more of these kind of events. And we really do want to foster a sense of community, because we can't solve any of the problems around living with stroke without you. We really appreciate all of your feedback, as well as the lived experience expertise that you bring to our teams. So those were the results of our surveys. Just to wrap this up before I hand over to Dr. Jewsop, the top stroke research priorities that you told us about was that you do indeed want more education. For us, for you, but also for us, you want researchers to know more about what it's really like to live with stroke. You want more research into movement recovery, including walking, balance, arm function, and improving rehabilitation services. You want more research into aphasia and communication. And in fact, to make sure that all trials that are looking at stroke recovery are inclusive of people with aphasia or any communication disabilities that have come from the stroke. You definitely all want more research into fatigue. And we're really pleased to tell you that that's an area of work that is ongoing. There's a couple of different studies now that you could take part in around fatigue. Mental health and depression is important to lots of people. You do want more prevention studies and more supports for families and carers, a focus on living well long-term after stroke. And I can assure you we are really focused on that. We know that even though there's amazing emergency stroke treatments available now, that once you've had a treatment, all the problems aren't magically gone. And we do need to make sure that we invest heavily in research into long-term recovery. And the last area that you said was important was cognitive function. So things like memory loss and other thinking problems that arise from the stroke, that's another area that you're really interested in us researching. So look, thank you so much for putting the time into doing the survey. It was a couple of years ago. It's just been published in a journal. So that's kind of how long things can take in the research space. But we have been, in the meantime, using the results and what you've told us to try and improve things. So thank you. Dr. Prajwal, who you might know, he's just asking where you can read the survey report. So the survey report, in part, I've just given you now, but I can put a link to the research paper itself in the comments, and then endeavour early next year to kind of step out the different things that you said in more detail in the newsletter. So thanks for asking, Praj. Okay, I now have the great pleasure, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, of handing over to Dr. Jewsop Kim. I think if you could introduce yourself rather than me giving a long spiel, because it would be nicer to see your face, that would be great. So I'm going to pop out of the way and hand over to you to talk about how stroke care in Australia has been impacted on by COVID. So thank you, Jewsop.
Thanks, Gillian. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Jewsop. I'm a research fellow at Monash University, and today I'll show you some of the impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the quality of acute stroke care using our Australian Stroke Clinical Registry data. So it's been a while since the start of the pandemic in Australia, so I'll just remind you about some of these timelines. We had national restrictions commence in March 2020 with the first wave. We had a second wave in around June, and very few cases after around October. And as I'm sure you're all aware, in 2020, most cases were in Victoria. In a study we published earlier this year, we showed how fewer patients were being treated in a stroke unit during the first wave of the pandemic using data from our registry. Based on clinician surveys that were undertaken at that time, this finding seemed to be related to redeployment of staff and changes to stroke units. And you can find out a little bit more about that paper using this QR code or that reference at the top of the slide there. In this presentation today, I'll show you how the quality of care differed by state and by patients' care setting during the first and second waves of the pandemic. So a little bit different to the paper that was published. So again, we use data from the OSCAR. This is a national data collection program used to monitor the quality of care provided to patients admitted with stroke and transient ischemic attack. The registry monitors several evidence-based therapies provided to patients, including thrombolysis, which is the clot-busting medication, treatment in the stroke unit, multiple allied health and nursing interventions, provision of medications, and the provision of discharge care plans. To analyse these changes in quality of care provided during the pandemic, we used data from 61 hospitals that contributed data in both 2019 and 2020. We used this technique called interrupted time series analysis to assess these trends in the provision of evidence-based therapies. And basically, this involves summarising the data into weeks and then looking at the weeks in succession. And we split up the data into a few critical periods based on the timings of the first and second waves. And we looked at the trends within these critical periods. The analysis included almost 40,000 episodes. Around 44% were in Victoria, and around 70% were treated in stroke units. Mean age of the cohort was around 73 years. 56% were male, and 70% had an ischemic stroke. So these are the results of the time series and interrupted time series analyses. And just to orient you to this graph, each of these dots on the graph represents a week since the start of 2019, and the vertical lines represent the start of the first wave, the second wave, and the end of the second wave. And this is actually the same for every one of the graphs I'll show you. In this graph, we're comparing Victoria with other states in terms of the proportion of patients provided thrombolysis. Victoria is shown in the black dots and the solid black line, and other states are shown in white and the dotted white line. You can't really tell what the difference here is because there's so much variability between the weeks. But basically what we have here are parallel lines right up until the second wave, where we saw other states improve relative to Victoria in terms of the provision of thrombolysis. And also Victoria seemed to dip a little bit again after the end of the second wave. This graph shows the median door-to-needle time. This is the amount of time taken from arrival at hospital to the provision of thrombolysis that I showed you on the previous slide. So here, lower is better as opposed to for all the percentage treated graphs I'll be showing you. Just follow the solid line for Victoria here and the dashed line for other states again. What we observed was a gradual increase in times up until the first wave, and then a decline in this metric over the first wave. There seemed to be an increase again for the second wave, and while other states seem to have reduced door-to-needle times over this period, Victoria didn't seem to recover from this until the end of that second wave, where you start to see the decline in door-to-needle time, which is good. This graph shows how treatment in a stroke unit. This graph shows treatment in a stroke unit, and you can start to see a very clear separation of the lines here as opposed to the previous slide. So hopefully that's a lot clearer. But treatment in a stroke unit appeared to be similar in between the states prior to the first wave, but then there was a decline in Victoria, whereas this was maintained in other states. And because we know stroke units are specialised in the treatment of stroke, we wanted to know if the quality of care provided in patients treated in a stroke unit was also impacted by the pandemic. So in the next part of the presentation, I'll be showing you a comparison between patients treated in a stroke unit and patients not treated in a stroke unit. So in these graphs, we're showing you mobilisation and swallow screen in stroke units in black and alternate wards in white. And you can clearly see how stroke units are superior to these alternate wards in the provision of these therapies before and after the pandemic. But how the provision of these therapies started to decline in alternate wards after the second wave, while this was maintained in stroke units. We basically saw the same thing for aspirin being provided within 48 hours and the provision of antithrombotic medications at discharge from hospital. This was a much clearer decline for antithrombotic medications at discharge and you can see that there was around a 20% drop in this treatment provided outside of stroke units. We saw the same patterns again for the provision of antihypertensive medications and lipid-lowering medications at discharge, around a 20% decrease in patients treated outside of stroke units after the second wave. And probably the most interesting finding that we observed was that care planning increased for patients who were treated outside of stroke units. So there may be some sort of substitution of care happening there. And we also saw that fewer people were being discharged to rehabilitation over time in both of these groups. And there wasn't really any difference in the trend between the states. So in conclusion, we saw that acute stroke care in Victoria was affected more than in other states because of the pandemic. We saw increased differences in the provision of most evidence-based therapies between ward settings during the pandemic periods, except for the discharge care planning, of course. And we need to do some more work to see if these changes we observed are associated with any changes in outcomes. But it does appear that there is at least some evidence to say that we should be encouraging access to stroke units even during a pandemic. I'd just like to acknowledge my esteemed colleagues and of course acknowledge all of the people who contribute to the OSCR. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that work, Giuseppe. I think definitely when I was working as a physiotherapist, I had absolutely no idea how much work was going on behind the scenes to look at data. And it's been really eye-opening coming into research. And we know that there's definitely inequities in how easy it is to access stroke units and things around the country. And I'm really reassured to see that these things are being measured so that we can improve them in the future. Do you mind if I ask you a question from Brenda Booth? I'm going to pop it up on the screen.
Hi, Brenda.
So Brenda is a friend of ours. She's a dear friend of mine and a very fierce stroke advocate with lots of expertise. She wants to know, during the lockdown period, was there any evidence that people who were having strokes or TIAs weren't presenting to hospital?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and unfortunately we can't answer that question using the registry, because we only pick up people who are admitted to the hospitals participating in the registry. But the health departments in Victoria, at least, I know, are looking into things like that. They can. I'm sure they can release some information eventually to let you know about kinds of things as well.
Yeah. And look, I know that you're not a medical doctor. You're doctors from doing a PhD and researching in this field. But I guess from my position as a physiotherapist, we've got to make sure that we're encouraging people to still come to hospital and to still ring an ambulance if you're having symptoms that you think perhaps could be a stroke. It's no good avoiding hospital because of concerns around COVID. It's really important that you must ring an ambulance. An ambulance won't come and take you away, and that it won't be a waste of resources if they don't think that it's important. Because you've showed us, Giuseppe, that if you get to a hospital that's got a stroke unit, I mean, well, you didn't show us that if you get to a hospital with a stroke unit that the outcomes are better, but that there is a lot of research to support that. And is there any further comments that you can make around the data about that and the difference when people can get to a stroke unit in time?
Yeah, so it's not really about the getting into a stroke unit in time. I definitely mirror your sentiments about presenting to hospital, and I think the main reason for that would be that we want to provide that thrombolysis treatment as soon as possible, because I'm sure everyone here has heard the phrase time is brain, and that's because the sooner the thrombolysis medication provided, the better the outcomes are for patients. In terms of stroke units, yeah, we do want to encourage people, we do want to encourage to treat people in stroke units, because we know that patients treated in there, they are attended to by people who are specialised in the treatment of patients with stroke, and there's plenty of evidence out there that if you are treated in a stroke unit that you have better outcomes. But yeah, certainly we yet to investigate the outcome stuff, outcomes part of the analysis using our registry anyway.
Yeah. And look, thank you so much for all your dedicated work. I know it's a big team at the Australian Clinical Stroke Registry based in Melbourne, but working with clinical staff and hospital staff who are gathering this information from people with strokes in hospitals to share with you, so that you can make sure that we're looking at making all stroke, making stroke care availability, making it much more equitable, if I can get my words out this morning. And look, one of the things that's going on in New South Wales at the moment is there's been some amazing funding for a New South Wales tele-stroke service. So even if you live in an area where you know that there's not a stroke unit at your local hospital, the idea is that you must just call an ambulance and receive emergency care. There's now expert stroke neurologists who are available by phone and video to link in and support the staff at whatever hospital you're at to make the right decision for your recovery. So I'm going to say goodbye to Dr. Giuseppe Kim just now. Thank you so much. And then share a video from Dr. Carlos Garcia Esperon about the New South Wales Telestroke Service. So thank you so much. I'm doing the hosting and the clicking of changing people's videos, so you can laugh at me whilst I look like I'm concentrating hard. So let me pull up the video. I'm going to leave you Mark on screen.
How are you, everyone? My name is Carlos. I'm Carlos Garcia Esperon. I'm one of the stroke neurologists in Newcastle. And I am one of the members of the New South Wales Telestroke network. So definitely it is a pleasure to me to present you these results of the Telestroke service. Let me share my slides, as this is the third time. I promise that I have to do it, as I didn't share the slides and I was just looking at myself. So let me do this right now, because I'm not going to record it 4 times. Jill, sorry. Just joking. So yes, New South Wales Telestroke. Definitely is a pleasure to be here and telling you and explain the results of New South Wales Telestroke service in this year and a half almost of existence, and it's a pleasure to present this on behalf of the big team that is our New South Wales Telestroke Network. Definitely starting acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we meet on today and pay our respects to elders past and present. We know that time is running. We know that every minute counts and every hour when a patient is coming with a stroke. But the challenge happens when you are not living close to a comprehensive stroke center or a center able to deliver thrombolysis. And this is the reality that we face in Australia. We live in a big country, and we know that the comprehensive stroke centers and the thrombolysis centers are mostly grouped here in the coast. We know that 29% of the Australian population lives in rural and remote regions. So how can we offer thrombolysis and identify those patients candidate for retrieval fast enough when they are living like miles or k's away from a comprehensive stroke center? So to fight that imbalance in access of care, the states have developed telestroke networks, and New South Wales has developed a telestroke network in March 2020. And this is a network formed by a group of stroke neurologists led by my colleague. Here is the boss, Professor Ken Butcher, based in Prince of Wales. One of the things that we are very proud of is that this network is a combination of stroke neurologists from very different areas. We have stroke neurologists from regional sites as myself, my colleague Professor Spratt, and my colleague Alvin Chu. And we have the workforce of stroke neurologists from regional as Tamworth and Wagga, neurologists from Gosford, and neurologists from Sydney. So it's a combination of those neurologists that were already delivering thrombolysis and identifying patients for reperfusion therapies locally, and neurologists from the comprehensive stroke centers in Sydney or Newcastle. So it's based on enhancing the local teams rather than the skilling. I think that is one of the things that we are very proud of. How does it work? As soon as New South Wales ambulance identifies a patient, FAST positive or Hunter rate positive, goes to the closest telestroke site. The ED physician assesses the patient and does something called the ASAP tool. That's something done by the registrar or the nurse, and it's an easy workflow that would guide the team towards a yes/no decision of activating a stroke call. If we get called, we discuss initially very briefly what to do, the patient's symptoms, medical history, to make a decision, a quick decision about should we image, yes, no. And once that we get that decision, the ED team will go into the radiology department and start to perform all the brain imaging while we are starting to click and logging in the video platforms that we tend to use in Skype for Business. And then we go back to the ED department, we assess the patient together, we discuss the plan, and then we discuss the plan with the next of kin or with the patient if he's able to understand and get consent from him or her. If the patient is having a hemorrhage, we decide about the start immediate blood pressure control and liaise with the neurosurgery, closer neurosurgical unit. If the patient is candidate for thrombolysis, start to deliver thrombolysis locally. And if the patient is candidate for clot retrieval, we identify the patients and we liaise with the comprehensive stroke center towards a quick transfer. And one of the things that I think that all of us are very proud of is about the education and the education component that has been massive, performed by New South Wales, Telestroke, ACI, eHealth. As you can see, already mentioned this ASAP tool, which is a great tool, very well accepted by them, by the local teams. It helps them, guides them, support the junior to make that call and to call the stroke specialist, which I think that's very important. Also, we perform multiple simulations and visits to the sites. But unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we had to look for different platforms to enhance the education and avoid that we know that toll that education suffered with COVID-19. And our colleague Rowan Walker at the University of Newcastle, HMRI, he had a lot of experience already in virtual reality modules locally. So himself and many other members of the John Hunter Stroke team, and definitely ACI and eHealth work together on developing these telestroke modules, which are very intuitive and that they are have been very well received by the local teams. And it's an easy way to develop updated stroke education remotely. And this is data from our telestroke sites. This is from 2-3 weeks ago, so the numbers are not completely right, but gives you an idea of what are we up to. 16 sites are already activated since March 2020 with a plan of 23, 24. And you can see here the list of sites from COFs and Port in Mid-North Coast starting being the pioneers in March 2020 till the Hunter jumping over the last few months. Over 1,300 telestroke activations happened to date, and there was pretty close to 250 reperfusion recommendations. That's a combination of thrombolysis locally or transfer for clot retrieval. This is an astonishing effort. So once that we have 23, 24 sites, what else? What else can we do? What else we want to do? Well, I think that now we are developing a system in which if the patient arrives to the Comprehensive Stroke Center or the patient arrives to a telestroke site, the patient will jump already into a very well streamlined network and would get thrombolysis if required, management of blood pressure, and any other drugs to reverse anticoagulants if it's a hemorrhage, or transfer to the Comprehensive Stroke Center for clot retrieval or surgery. One of the future challenges is, as you can see in this picture, to the pre-hospital phase and to identify the right patient to go to the right hospital. And this is something that we have been working in Newcastle through the use of the Hunter Aid, and very well supported by New South Wales Ambulance, firstly, and also by New South Wales Telestroke and ACI. And it helped us to educate paramedics in the use of a simplified score to identify those patients that they are likely benefit to bypass to a telestroke site or to a comprehensive stroke center. And this is something that we are currently working on too. And we think that altogether, the use of this pre-hospital plus a strong telestroke network could be definitely a fantastic combination to provide telestroke services and stroke services to everyone in New South Wales, living in rural, remote, or living in metro. I would like definitely to thank everyone. Firstly, thanks to you for listening at me. This is the third time that I record this, so I'm not sure if this is sounding terrible or not. Unfortunately, I'm unable to be there today, so thanks so much, and thanks so much, Jill, for inviting me. Definitely thanking the patients, and definitely New South Wales Telestroke. It has been amazing and a unique experience being part of this network, and very, very it has been a unique opportunity for us to work with such a great group of professionals, ACI, eHealth, and definitely New South Wales Ambulance, that they make an excellent work in such a terrible and under pressure scenario as is running and always rushing in with stroke patients up and down. If you have any questions about this or about anything else that you want me to ask about stroke or any questions, definitely don't hesitate to jump in. We are pretty maniacs on our emails, so we check them very often. So definitely send me an email anytime. I would be very happy to reply to that. And I hope that you're enjoying the day and enjoying the other talks, as the program looks fantastic. Thanks so much again. Take care.
It was really wonderful to have Carlos present, even though he couldn't be here with us. I've lost my little button to stop the share, so any moment now. There we go. So yes, he's not available live to answer your questions, but he did say if you do have some, to either put them in the comments or email them directly to Carlos, or you can try emailing them to us at the Stroke Register. We'll pass them on and get an answer back for you. On that, I wanted to share this. My own experience is that in the last couple of years, I think possibly due to your involvement, Stroke Register members, excuse me, I have seen a culture change in people working together, the health professionals and researchers, in really wanting to put efforts into answering questions and being more available. So it was, Carlos is extraordinarily busy, and I was just really pleased to know that he genuinely wants to be involved and answer questions on top of his workload. We are really lucky in Newcastle to have a team of dedicated, very friendly and lovely health professionals and researchers. So right now, unfortunately, we had Melita Guy from the Stroke Foundation. She was going to come and talk to us about the services that the Stroke Foundation offers, resources that you can access. She's sick today, so I'm going to very quickly try and fill her shoes. That'll be difficult. Not only does she work for the Stroke Foundation professionally, she's someone who has experienced a stroke herself. She's a speech pathologist by background and a wonderful singer. While she's not here though, I want to give you a very quick spin around the Stroke Foundation's website where you can find their resources, and also show you where you can get in contact with them if you're not an internet user, or if you just prefer to talk to someone on, an actual telephone. That's possible. So I'll pop these up on the screen. So this is the Stroke Foundation website. The Stroke Foundation, we don't work for the Stroke Foundation, but we work closely with the Stroke Foundation, along with lots of other researchers and people who live with stroke. Our Professor Coralie English is involved in working with them to develop the Stroke Clinical Guidelines, which is kind of the guidebook and the reference manual for stroke health professionals all over the country and indeed the world. So just for everyone's general information, I wanted to show you that you can find those on the Stroke Foundation website. So it's not a private book that only health professionals can find. So if you go to strokefoundation.org.au, there's a couple of different websites under this umbrella. So the Inform Me site, so I'll just click there and open it up, is the site where it's information targeted at health professionals, but of course anyone can access it. It's not hidden away. And there's a few different areas of that. You can find this stroke data that JUSUP was talking about and data pulled from other research studies. There's the guidelines, and then there's a bunch of different resources. Some of the resources that are currently online are guidelines for making sure when we're offering telerehabilitation that it's actually accessible, that it's actually likely to work in real life, and we're confident that it's getting better because we've had lots of people who live with stroke involved in developing some of those resources. So have a click through there if you're interested in what health professionals are using, or if you're a health professional yourself. There's another tab. This is called the Enable Me website. And that's a website that's built together with and for people who live with stroke. There's lots of handy tips. There's areas where you can talk to other people and kind of throw ideas around about a problem. And also there's links to StrokeLine, which is a fantastic resource. So StrokeLine is manned or womaned or peopled by health professionals and people who know about the different resources and support services around the place. There's a few ways you can do a live chat with them, or you can phone them and talk to them, or there's an email address as well. So the StrokeLine tab kind of pops up on most of the pages of the Stroke Foundation website, or in fact, it's got its own page where it talks about who you might be talking to if you need something. So it's not medical advice, but it's a great resource to use if you're looking to find out which kind of doctor or which health professional should I go to about this problem. What other resources and services are there? And look, it's a really brilliant resource. I feel lucky to work in stroke care. because there's just a lot more available easily to guide clinical practice and to kind of link you in with people that you might need. So that's, probably not done Melita's presentation justice, but that's the Stroke Foundation website. We're running a little bit behind time, but I've enjoyed the conversation so far. I'm going to pop up a pre-recorded video from our keynote speaker, Emma G. She is going to join us live in person. I hope. She did say that she is in Melbourne in the middle of an electrical storm. So I'm glad we have a pre-recorded presentation from her. But yeah, she'll pop up soon and be able to talk about this and answer some questions. So I'll just pull up her presentation now and hope that she gets through the storm okay and her internet works and that she can join us. So I'll disappear and see you after we hear from Emma. Hang on, I'm doing this incorrectly. Video file. Actually, while I'm sharing it, a little bit more background to Emma. She is a survivor of stroke who is an occupational therapist by background. She had her stroke. She'll explain a bit more of that as a young woman. And she's now gone on to build a career as an international speaker. She speaks with health professionals, organizations. She's involved in working with boards on trying to educate boards on how to become more accessible. She's pretty much a legend, and I'm a big fan of hers. And I'm going to, with no further ado, just hand over to her video now.
This is me 8 days after brain surgery, where I'd unexpectedly had a stroke during the procedure and went into a coma. I'd elected to have this craniotomy to remove a tiny malformation in my brainstem, but it had gone awfully wrong and I'd had a stroke. Prior to this operation, I'd naively thought I'd return to my full-time job as an occupational therapist, return to living independently, and gradually resume my love for long-distance running. I do eventually wake in my new realm, but I can't move. I can't even blink. I can't communicate. I'm paralyzed literally by fear, beyond terrified. I'm robbed, locked in, and dependent. I'm going to get back to those feelings a bit later on, but my name is Emma G, and thank you so much for having me here to mark World Stroke Day. This is the image of me clicking my heels about 4 months before my stroke, and I was going to give you a demonstration here today, but I think I'll jump off your computer screens. So instead, I aim to get you all to click your own heels a little higher, and therefore not only improve, your own ability to enjoy stroke recovery, but have more insight into the journey for other people. So we're going to look at ways we can really bounce high in stroke care, especially in regards to access and inclusion. So not only improving your support, but also the return to work experience and quality of life for those impacted by stroke. I'll quickly share my story as both a patient, a stroke survivor, and a therapist, really give you my dual insight of my 15 years as a stroke survivor, and really highlight, I think, what is possible. To remember that it's not what happens to you that matters, it's how you choose to deal with it. And I think this message is also captured in my book, Reinventing Emma, which is something I went on to write and led to many work opportunities for me, and really details a huge impact life after stroke not only has on my life, but others as well. And it is available via my website. But as we don't have long, I'm going to really relay my experience to date as a stroke survivor particularly in the return to work process. And hopefully today, on World Stroke Day, we can all get more awareness about stroke and we can all bounce high in each of our roles in the return to work process. And I think there'll be time later in the panel if you have any questions. So on to my story. So as you all know, I survived my stroke at the young age of 24. And yeah, I had had a normalish life up until this point, working full-time as an occupational therapist, and was a really active, healthy person. But I'd actually had an unexpected bleed, a stroke, and went into a coma. And to cut a long story short, I was sent to rehabilitation, where I began my never-ending stroke recovery journey, relearning to walk, talk, and eat again. Full-time work was no longer as a therapist. It was very much my stroke recovery. How long will we take to come undone? If you know the answer, tell me now. And I'll write up a calendar.
So just remember to blink in.
Cause what if what we see is all we've got? We say you've kept some fire aside to set light to some surprising night. And say you've locked some fire away to set light to some surprising day. Any day now. So months and months of rehabilitation, learning how to do absolutely everything again. And all this time, I naively assumed that being largely physically affected from my stroke, I would avoid all the emotional stresses and hidden invisible disabilities of stroke. Like many of us experience fatigue and frustration, having a low self-esteem, nerve pain, it goes on and on. But I realized that these emotional invisible effects were definitely present. My identity was robbed. I was no longer the old Em. I was gutted. And improving my self-esteem, and very low one at that, and reinventing who I was, my identity was crucial in allowing me to endure the physical battles that lay ahead of me. But I didn't feel I had enough time to do this. I wasn't ready to return to work, return to my old life, to fix myself. And before I knew, I almost felt handballed out into this new realm. Out into my old world in a totally new body. Trying to integrate into the community and simultaneously battle with the other issues and anxieties that normal people my age faced, like paying off my mortgage and getting married and having kids. Trying to keep up with those around you, plus trying to push through the fatigue, and also grieve the life that I'd once had and that I had envisaged in my future. And I think then there's the ongoing issues associated with trying to new things and dealing with how others' actions and attitudes returning to your normal roles, returning to work, and the inability for many to sustain full-time work because of the fatigue and physical and emotional barriers. The massive financial toll that this does place on everyone's lives in going through stroke recovery. I think it was also the beginning of entering the outside world and realizing how differently people saw me and trying to manage society's misconceptions about stroke and disability, the huge emotional toll that this placed on me. And I think here education is crucial. Both education about the many physical and emotional side effects of stroke that vary so much for each individual survivor. Especially, I think, the many hidden or invisible side effects, the areas that many, I guess, perhaps are harder for many of us to see and therefore understand or diagnose or manage. Educating everyone involved around that survival, not just about the stroke's effects, but also the risk factors, how the different strategies that each person may use, and how community supports are available and can help them, support them following a stroke. Helping them navigate issues around work and work out how they can adapt to and better manage life after stroke. It is a critical time to address those physical, cognitive and emotional issues that then help them return to their normal-ish lives and participate in life again. So thinking how you can better educate as a stroke survivor or some support them in that process. But I really want to focus on return to work here. You know, the ongoing difficulty that I had in returning to work, realizing that life was never going to be the same again, that the old Anne was not going to come back, that I had to accept what I couldn't change and change what I could. That despite having a degree in occupational therapy and a full-time job waiting for me and lots of motivation, I think returning to work was one of the hardest parts of my recovery so far. I guess in this phase for me, I felt thrown into the too hard basket. And it's here when returning to life as a survivor and their networks need support to participate in life and support that they need but really don't want. And I realized through trial and error that I would need this support, but it would not be so easy. I needed to enlist and get as much support I could be so I could be independent and successfully return to work. But this came the many assessments needing that exact support that I needed that I did not want. And I soon learned that to be eligible for this, I really had to say what I couldn't do. The huge impact that my stroke had had on me, really declaring what I could no longer do, not focusing on my strengths. I had already acquired enough visible deficits, and I didn't want to sit there in these assessments and list all the visible effects as well and what might prevent me from getting a job. And I think many survivors choose not to disclose this information because they fear that they'll lose their job and are seen as incompetent. And I think it's often easier to internalize these effects, but we need to work out ways that we can support them. Ways that all these assessments, it's not about disability because those are weaknesses and putting them out, what you're robbed at, the negative associated with that, negative things associated with my diagnosis makes someone feel so stuck and disempowered. And I really chose in my return to work after so many times feeling so robbed and gutted at that negative focus, to focus on my abilities and not my disabilities. I guess realizing over time that although my capacity to do tasks in the same way had changed, I could still adapt how I do this, led to manage my deficits and develop new skills and contribute to society once again. And I became adamant to begin using my own experience as a patient and therapist to educate and advocate for those many others in my exact situation. I gradually learned that drawing on and developing my strengths was the best way for me to do this. And actually, about 3 years after my stroke, I did eventually become a real working girl again. I realized that in managing my pain, I learned to swim, I do yoga, and ensuring I had a balance in my regime. But as I said in my book, I did become a real working girl again, and realizing that I could no longer resume my role as an OT and feeling really frustrated and disempowered, I founded my own business as an inspirational speaker. In fact, in learning to speak again was actually a catalyst in learning how I could then again voice what had been dormant in my body for so long. In this new role, I could actually manage my difficulties, like sitting to present to accommodate my balance and wearing a microphone to project my weak voice. I did everything in my new role as an advocate to better manage all my deficits. But still, there were so many barriers in access I could not easily navigate. For example, traveling was something that I did a lot. And about 3 years after my stroke, I had found my own business, and I remember my first time booking an accessible room. You see, I guess I had my first speaking conference interstate, which meant that because I couldn't return to being a full-time physical OT, this was my new career path, where I could finally communicate all that had been trapped in my body as a patient. And as I'd learnt the importance of planning ahead to prevent facing unnecessary obstacles, when booking for this hotel, which was close to the venue that I'd be presenting at, I both called and emailed the hotel to ensure that they had an accessible room, flagging to them that I needed this because I had a walking frame. So picture me rocking up to my hotel interstate after an early flight, a full day at a conference and a networking dinner. Absolutely exhausted, but also relieved and excited that I'd made it through the day and I pushed through that fatigue. And I was keen to go straight to my room because I was so exhausted, but the lady behind the desk gave me my key and opened the door. When she opens the door, I see a quite modern kind of roomy suite. I think, great. But then I turn to my right and I see this big staircase. Stairs, I say, dumbfounded. The lady looks at me with a big grin on her face and says, "Yes, ma'am, we've upgraded you." "But I can't do stairs," I said, looking at my walking frame. And she looks at me and she says, "Sorry, ma'am, but there are no other rooms available here tonight." So I'm standing at the foot of this big staircase and learnt that this booked accessible room has stairs and that there are no other rooms available. The lady helping me looks at me blankly and really shows no understanding or willingness to find a predicament to a solution to my predicament. So I turn to her with tears in my eyes and I say, I will crawl up these stairs, but if there is a fire, come and get me. And I take a deep, shaky sigh and hitch up my grey skirt suit, drop onto my knees and put my pink pajamas under my arm and my top bag in my teeth and crawl. You know, this is inexcusable, but sadly it's so common in so many environments and workplaces. And I think this story highlights the importance of good access, both physically and metaphorically, and including the survivor in all environments and workplaces so we are optimising their performance and quality of life. I think it also highlights the importance of us being mindful of not only the physical access barriers, but the importance of us including the emotional obstacles that each survivor is likely to experience that stops them being the best that they can be. How, in not accommodating my needs, my own performance was compromised and I was feeling left so incompetent and disempowered. That experience was one of many that I go on to detail in my book, Reinventing Emma, a book that I published when I realised the huge barriers to inclusion and access that existed in society and the need to further educate others to help empower other stroke survivors and create a more diverse workforce. So although I personally encountered a lot of return to work barriers, I did feel that I'd finally adapted to life as a stroke survivor. But then COVID hit and forced me, and I think everyone universally, to suddenly stop and readjust everything again. And it did stop me travelling like I'd done and forced me to work in a different role. And I began working at the Sun Foundation, a non-for-profit organisation really looking at resolving the issue of younger people living in aged care. And so I worked remotely and I began working last year in this role as a lived experience advisor where I work part-time remotely from my own home and basically inform from my own lived experience to better educate and inform the work that the Sun Foundation does. So whether it's facilitating a workshop or carrying out a consultation, developing a resource, looking at a policy document, ensuring that one's valuable lived experience is forefront. And I think it really makes sure that we are making sure that resources and everything is people are building their capacity and empowered. I've also been recently reviewing work on the diversity and inclusion on boards, suggesting strategies that they could inject in their, put in place to really mitigate or navigate some of the barriers that I've identified. So I think endless opportunities in my work, even though it's remote work and not what I used to do, to really inject lived experience into the organisation. And I also have continued to run my speaking business on the side. Just at this point of time, I'm doing it remotely. But I think it's really important to highlight there that in order to manage my own stroke recovery, it has been vital that I do develop a routine and I'm holistic. And so I know that if I move and manage my invisible pain better. The other areas in my work are significantly improved. So I have that balance, and it's really important for me to educate people about this, so they are mindful of both the physical and emotional barriers that stop me performing at my best. How I can better adapt, and they can support me to do so, whether it's ensuring I've got the right equipment or the documents I receive are adapted in the most accessible format. So thinking about you and how you can both be physically and emotionally more resilient and provide more inclusive and accessible environments, whatever journey you're on. A stroke, whenever it happens, is terrible and life-changing ordeal. Although stroke does cause many disabilities that make it difficult for so many people to work in the way that they used to before their stroke, it is important to remember that stroke survivors are really capable people. They may just need a few accommodations. To remember that it's not just what happens to you that matters, it's how you choose to deal with it. So back to waking from my coma. So I've had a stroke at 24 years of age, and I can't move. I can't even blink. I can't communicate. I'm paralyzed by fear, beyond terrified. I'm robbed, so locked in, dependent. My independence has completely vanished. And these feelings are also evident when workplaces aren't sensitive to the needs of people with disabilities. In fact, in not making a workplace accessible or inclusive, we're sadly further disabling rather than enabling. I've experienced the amazing outcomes that have been achieved when they have been when workplaces have been highly flexible, adaptable, and accommodating. And it's amazing when these supports are in place, when I am believed in and able to achieve what is possible. Workplaces where I feel like an asset, not a burden. So let's provide accessible workplaces to promote independence and inclusive environments. Let's choose to bounce higher and unlock possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. There's such a lot to think about from what you've shared with us today. And I'm thrilled to announce that, in fact, Emma's internet connection and power isn't lost in the Melbourne thunderstorm. So she has joined us backstage. We're going to shortly take a quick break so you can go and again take advantage of the generous catering on offer at this event. Put the kettle on, stretch. We're just going to take 5 minutes. And after the break, we're coming back with a panel of people who have had different experiences in, getting back into the workplace, attempting work after stroke. They're going to share with you their personal experiences and also tips and tricks and hacks for advocating for yourself, for figuring out what accommodations you need and how to communicate about those things. I'm really looking forward to it. So yeah, get up, go stretch, and we'll see you back in 5 minutes. If you do keep watching the screen, I'm going to show you a video that one of our favourite people, Neil Penn, was involved with the City of Newcastle. And again, we thank you thank them for their support with this event.
Neil Penn. I've been in Newcastle since January 1983. I spent 31 years in the steel industry until I had a stroke in 2013. Oh, it's a massive change in your life having a stroke. It just changes. I've been in Newcastle since January 1983. I spent 31 years in the steel industry until I had a stroke in 2013. Oh, it's a massive change in your life having a stroke. It just changes everything. Simple things you might take for granted, like even just going to the toilet, feeding yourself, things you could do yesterday but can't do today, basic things. It's just life-changing. I think it would do everybody good to have something to do with somebody disabled, because it just gives you a whole new outlook on life. You take it for granted until you are disabled, and then it hits you like a Mack truck that you can't do what you used to do. You've got to rethink everything. Probably in the last 5 years, Newcastle has become an accessible city. Makes a huge difference to where you can and cannot go. Having that transport available to you easily. When the trams came in, being able to get on the tram at same heights, because they've got platforms matched to trams, no steps, it's just smooth. It's just a great way to travel. It's great to get out and about in Newcastle. It's a big part of who I am. Been here long enough to have seen a lot of changes, and it's just a great place to be. People are very friendly. If they see you having trouble, they'll come and ask you if you need a hand. Had that the other day, crossing the road up at Elmore Vale. Lady asked if I was right and she gave me a hand. I said I was right and she gave me a hand anyway. And it's just becoming such an awesome place to live.
Hello. If you're down in the kitchen or, having a stretch break, by all means carry on, but make sure that you can hear us because we're coming back. If you've just joined us, I'm Gillian Mason. I'm the manager of the Stroke Research Register, affiliated with Hunter Medical Research Institute, the Uni of Newcastle, and Hunter New England Health. And I'm thrilled to be able to broadcast live to you this afternoon. I'm on Awabakal land and pay my respects ongoing to elders past, present and emerging. I'm just about to introduce a panel of people, and in fact, I'm going to put them all on screen while I set the scene for this next session. So welcome Rachel, John, Julie and Emma. I'm really hoping that Gilbert also joins us with you, Emma. So we've got everyone here today because we've talked about research this morning. We want to have a chat about real life, basically. Research should be about real life. It should answer questions and aim to solve problems that people have when they're outside of a hospital as well as when they're inside of one. And we know with this theme for World Stroke Day this year about precious time, that needs to be, pushed out to be thinking about all time is precious. So once people have finished with their stroke care and once rehabilitation as such kind of is finished, or once someone moves on to the next phase of their life after a stroke, your time's still precious. So we should not forget you. And today's discussion is about how you can advocate for yourself. Hopefully there's something in there where you might be able to see your story in some of the stories of this brilliant bunch of people that I've gathered here. So that's what we're going to talk about. Before we go, just a reorientation to this format. So yes, this is a live stream, but if you're watching, you can ask a question. Please do. We want this to be interactive. You ask your question by typing it into the comments underneath the Facebook video or the YouTube video. If you are watching on Twitter, unfortunately, your Twitter comments won't kind of come up on my screen here for me to see them. So share this all around on Twitter, of course, but if you want to be involved, pop over to Facebook or YouTube. So that's the practical things. I will just do a very quick whip around and introduce everyone. I'm going to do that very briefly. Because the format for today is that people will share their own story in their own words, and then we'll have a chat as we go along. So firstly, I'm really pleased to introduce Rachel Peake. She is a brilliant woman who works with me at Hunter Medical Research Institute. She's a research assistant on the Stroke Research Register, has an environmental science background, and had her stroke when she was a younger woman, 24. Have I got that right?
Yeah, 25. Yeah.
25. And yeah, she's going to share more of her experiences with us a little bit later. We're really pleased to have her at the Stroke Register. We've got John, front and centre. I've known John for, I don't even know how many years, a lot of years. He's a bit of an excellent person. He is on the president of the board of the Stroke Recovery Association of New South Wales. And look, the Stroke Recovery Association is going to join us on Tuesday. So come back then to hear more about the services that they provide. John's also on the board of Health Consumers New South Wales. He's a world champion sailor, doesn't set the bar very high for us, and a friend. He has previously been at an executive level in WorkCover professionally, and he's going to share a bit about his work experience after stroke. We have the brilliant Emma G, who's also already introduced herself really beautifully. I'm so glad that you could join us from Melbourne. I'll just leave your introduction at that for now. And then I'm thrilled that Julie Hughes has joined us. Now, if I just bring this back up here, Julie has a long history as a lecturer and a solicitor with the University of Newcastle's Law School and its Legal Centre. So she's currently assisting with the university's Older Persons Legal Clinic, the lead member of the Mental Health Review Tribunal, and is the lawyer on the New South Wales Psychology Council. And her main area is health law, not employment law. There's lots of relevant expertise that she can share with us today. And I'm really thrilled, Julie, that you've joined us on the panel. So without hearing too much more from me just now, Rachel, could I invite you to take some time? There's no need to rush, and just share your story through having a stroke and then getting involved in work again.
Okay, so my name is Rachel Peake, and my pronouns are she and her. And for those people who are blind or visually impaired, I'm a white woman with dark hair and wearing a white shirt with spots. I'm speaking on Irene land in the New South Wales Hunter Valley, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I'm a research assistant at the Stroke Register, as you all know, at the Hunter Medical Research Institute. And I've got a background in environmental science. And I say with regret, shame, and pride that I've also had a stroke 17 years ago. And depending on how, depressed I'm feeling at the moment, I couldn't be anyone at all of these descriptions or any all at once. 17 years ago, before all these happened, I would say, what's a stroke and what's an AVM? Looking at you puzzled. Well, 17 years ago, I had a surgery to remove the AVM that I was born with in my brain. So an AVM is a tangle of blood vessels in the brain that bypasses normal brain tissue and directly diverts blood from the artery back to the vein. So things went wrong, and 3 surgeries later, I had a stroke and I was put in a coma. My mum said that at the time I was hot, and nurses in the ICU were trying to cool me down with fans and flannels over my forehead. I vomited at least 3 times, at least, and was having an angiogram daily. I remember having a CAT scan at least once, and I remember those surgery lights up on the roof. What the? Yeah, I don't know. But I don't remember being spoken to or giving any information about stroke, hemiparesis, or aphasia. But I just knew. So I was left with fatigue that still haunts me today, short-term memory loss, hemiplegia, pain that absolutely covers my whole body, and Wernicke's aphasia, also known as receptive aphasia. So my home life, I was living with 3 other students, each getting married next year or travelling overseas next year. So, and in education life, I was a Bachelor of Environmental Science graduate. So when I not get any work related to my degree, I decided to go for honours, in which I received first class honours in my year. I then applied for a PhD and studied to complete frog biology. So in that time, all the research and literature I completed myself, and with a disability. And I had to complete 5 projects and then do the 5 journals after those topics. I had no help from the university. So I kept applying for jobs related to my degree during this time, but was unsuccessful. I then did a Certificate 3 at TAFE in Geographical Information Systems, well, GIS to stand for, hoping that would lead to some sort of employment. But as soon as the employers, including Newcastle City Council, found out I was disabled, they were rejecting me, not being able to work full time. So I hope that the employers are starting to understand the benefits of hiring people who can start to work part-time or flexible or remotely in this current climate. I couldn't work part-time. I mean, I couldn't work full-time because of the fatigue. And I also applied for a job at John Hunter, but was rejected due to my not being able to work full-time due to my fatigue. And I also applied for 30 plus roles, more in the admin jobs along the way as well. So my experience has been that once employers find out that you are disabled, you get rejected. You are better off not being, you are better off not letting the employer know of your disability until the last moment. I would like to be accepted into employment like any other able-bodied person. I just I didn't choose to be disabled, and I don't think anyone else out there would either. I'm fortunate enough to get some part-time work in the last 3 years at HMRI on the stroke register. I thank Coralie and Jill for accepting me with the disabilities I have. And I also, lived experience of stroke is being an asset to bring to my role in this team. Unfortunately, the way that research funding works is that at the moment, no more hours are offered, and I need more work. So if you have any work, let me know. So I stopped applying for work, extra work now. It's just getting too hard with all the COVID stuff going on. I have a 9-year-old daughter as well that is home from school. Well, she just went back this week and is trying to understand what is going on and what is going on with her, what's going on with COVID, let alone what is going on with her mum as a stroke survivor. So people with disabilities need to realise that people with disabilities are capable and want to be part of the community and be employed. That's it.
Look, Ray, you know that you're an absolute asset to the team. And just quietly, anyone that comes on a panel live stream and just makes it into a job application is an entrepreneur. So anyone has more hours to Ray, you must leave enough time for her to keep working with us, however. But yeah. This is just kind of exactly how Emma had introduced similar stories of just having people assume, based on these misconceptions, that if you have obvious disabilities, that you're not competent. They make assumptions about you. And I'm really glad that this at least is a conversation that can aim to change that. But I don't want to make this into an awareness raising exercise and that's all. So we want to just talk a little bit more about, okay, what do you do? Because it's no good if people leave here and think, oh, that's a sad story because, you know, these people got left out of work. That's not good enough. We need to be anti-ableist in the way that we talk about stroke in research, in health services, and in general discourse. Thrilled to have you working with us, Ray, and thank you for sharing your experiences. Please ask questions. You can pose your questions to someone in particular in the comments if you like, or just ask a general question. We'll catalogue them when we get to the discussion part. Before we do that though, John, you had a very different experience in returning to work after your stroke. I mean, your circumstances were very different. You were senior in the organisation at the time. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what that was like and anything you'd like people to know?
I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
So if I just introduce myself, my name's John Garbutt. I had a major hemorrhagic stroke in February 2003. At the time, I was the director of the CEO's office at WorkCover. Came home from a week's planning conference, got out of bed early in the evening with a headache, collapsed on the floor with the hemorrhage. Was transported from home in Lake Macquarie to Wyong Hospital and straight into the helicopter to Royal North Shore, where I went into surgery. I spent the next 18 days in an induced coma, which, as I understand it, was touch and go whether I'd survive or not. When I came out of the coma, I couldn't stand up, couldn't walk, couldn't talk. So it's been a long haul back. I'm going to touch on, so I had 3 weeks in intensive care, another 4 weeks in the high dependency ward at Royal North Shore, which would now be known as a stroke unit. Was then transferred to Rankin Park for my rehab. And part of the reason for doing that was we had a young family at the time, school-age kids, and here I was in hospital 120 kilometres away from home. So at least being in Rankin Park was a bit of normality. On discharge from Rankin Park, I continued my rehab as an outpatient at the Polyclinic at Toronto. On discharge from Rankin Park, I could walk, but barely. I was walking with a walker. Had spent most of my time in the hospital, transferred by wheelchair. After a number of months as an outpatient, I was walking at least with a stick. And if I touch on specifically return to work, and I think that in many respects, what I'm going to talk about is what you would hope would happen. So firstly, referred to the social worker at the outpatient rehab unit, who did a number of things. One was to organise a neuropsych assessment, driving assessment to return to driving, and then I'll go on about the return to work. When I did the neuropsych assessment, which I did with, it was Dr. Warwick Irvine on the Central Coast, who happens to be the brother of Dr. John Irvine, who does a lot of the radiopsychology work. The day we did the testing it was a whole day. And he said, look, I have some people go home from this and they're so tired they can't get up. I remember doing the testing and I was getting something wrong, getting really annoyed with myself. And he said, you're not this tough on yourself at work, are you? I said, probably am. And in his report, he actually said, look, John is a really nice person, but doesn't believe that he won't cope. He had worked at a senior level and very effectively, and just thinks that, and I certainly, in my own mind, I thought, look, I've been sick, I'll be okay soon. It was attempting to go back to work that made me realise that I actually couldn't cope. So firstly, the neuropsych assessment, I think, indicated that if I went back to work, it should be, with some parameters around what I did. So, for example, only one task at a time, because the difficulty I'd have multitasking. There was also, at that time, there was a referral to CRS, which I think was Commonwealth Rehabilitation Service, and I used the word negotiated my return to work, but they went into the workplace and set the ground rules, if you like. Issues like there should only be one task at a time, that I would start in a half a day a week and would slowly build up from there. And I did. I started at half a day a week and built up. And for the life of me, I can't remember now whether it was 4 half days a week or 4 days a week at the end. I think it's one of those things I've just decided to blank out of my memory. But clearly, fatigue was an issue. The pressure of getting somewhere on time would cause me stress. And I clearly couldn't, before I'd been able to work in a very busy senior environment, I couldn't multitask. And the level of frustration was enormous. And I was doing project work rather than the work that I had been doing. And I came to the point that I didn't want to be working at that lower level. So I was medically examined and the decision taken that I'd be medically retired. And my wife actually indicated that that after that decision, said it was obvious that I was much more at peace with myself. So I did take medical retirement in 2007. What that's allowed me to do is to go on and do other things with my time. And I think, as Gillian mentioned in the introduction, I happen to be a director and the president of the Stroke Recovery Association. I'm the chairperson of Health Consumers New South Wales. I volunteer for Sailability each week, and as a result, get to sail their boats in competition. So
if that's an interruption from a pet, we need to see the pet, just to be clear. Otherwise, carry on, John.
Sorry.
That's the rules of this new climate of online work.
It is. I love when I'm doing teleconferences and the dogs participate.
Yeah.
Like when I'm running a board meeting, the dog votes.
That's fantastic. But yeah, sorry for the interruption.
No, you're welcome to interrupt anybody here.
Well, you were telling us about your being able to sail the boats at Sailability?
I guess before my illness, I'd sailed boats called a 12-foot skiff, which are extremely difficult boat to sail, reputed to be one of the hardest boats in the world to sail. Again, this is a bit of a throwaway line. The neuropsychologist said to me, "Made any bizarre decisions since your stroke?" I said, "Apart from lying in my hospital bed and thinking I was going to go buy a new 12-foot skiff and sail competitively, no." So returning with Sailability, which is the actually term either sailing for people with disabilities or sailing for everyone. They're a boat that is designed for people with a disability. You sit in a seat facing forward, steer with a joystick. That allowed me to return to sailing. Separately, I sailed in the Paralympic yacht in the Road to Rio campaign on the harbour. And I've sailed a number of major series. Was it Easter before last? I won the New South Wales State Championship in the Sailability boats. I've sailed Australian Championships in Hobart, Melbourne, Sydney, not sure where else. Sailed the World Championship in 2012 on Sydney Harbour, where I came 8th. And about 18 months ago, maybe a touch longer, I sailed the World Championship in Hiroshima, Japan. So I have to say sailing's been good to me. And sailing these boats, which are designed for people with a disability, has allowed me to return to sailing. Not at the level that I sailed before, but at a competitive level. And I think
you certainly haven't been slacking, that's for sure. But something that's striking me about and we've spoken a lot about this previously, it's striking that there seems to be this notion that you'll only be better from stroke and therefore kind of good again and over it all and overcoming if you get back to what you were before. But that's just not a reality. And trying to navigate who you are after something like that changes things is difficult in work and in your life. You're speaking about the great success and
I might touch on that. Yeah. I think I had to come to terms myself with the fact that I have the disability and it is a different me and my goals are now different. And yes, I can't sail the sort of boats that I sailed before, but I can sail and be competitive and enjoy myself. Yes, I can't work at an executive level, but I chair 2 boards, and that gives me a number of things: social interaction, allows me to use both my education background and my work background to contribute in areas that I've got an interest.
Yeah. I'm wondering if, and we will get back to a bit more context for Emma and for Julie, but just at this point, whether we can talk a bit about fatigue and cognitive problems. So just if you've just joined us, cognitive problems are like thinking problems. After a stroke, people's memory can be affected, or like John was explaining, the ability to multitask. And these are things that no one can see. So it's an experience that you have, and it's a disability that you have. It's not an incompetence that you have, but it's a disability that needs to be accommodated in a workplace. And I'm thinking through a few different situations, Rachel and Emma, that you've told me about, where the cognitive stuff going on. When do you decide to tell an employer about that? And what happens when you do?
I don't know. Emma?
I would say it is extremely hard, and I think as someone who presents quite physically impaired, it was quite a challenge for me because I was already visibly disabled. So highlighting my invisible weaknesses, I thought would only cause a hindrance to my ability to be employed. But I think to get the support that you need and perform at your best, you need to be able to, for them to understand that, and so you feel supported to disclose that. And I think that is particularly, for many people who are impacted more at a cognitive level or present with lots of invisible, hidden disabilities from their stroke. They choose, I think Rachel alluded to this, to not disclose, as it could actually really, really damage any chance of the employment which they need. And I also think in being supported to disclose that, it also extends the whole able, if you want to say, workplace and environment you're in, because they feel like, hey, that person has fatigue and she told them, and she's got these other things that help her. Now I can do that. So I think it also it really enables other people to feel they also can get the support that they have never been able to get because they don't have that physical disability. Is that kind of answering your question, Jill?
Yeah, I think so. It's tricky, isn't it? Because especially if you're having a lot of trouble entering the workforce again, you're not wanting to keep pointing out to people why it might be more difficult to employ you than the next person. And I really dislike putting it that way, but these are discussions that we have. I haven't had a stroke personally, but I live with fatigue around a different neurological condition. And it took me a lot of years, and I experienced a lot of discrimination around, opportunities. And rather than having the language and knowing that I would be supported, to just tell people what I needed so that my fatigue wouldn't affect my work performance. Because when you're just trying to push through and pretend these things aren't going on, if you make a mistake that you could have avoided, then it just starts to put doubt in people's mind. It's tricky, and maybe we can talk a bit more about ways that you can seek supports and ways that you have advocated for yourself. But at this point, I'd just like to introduce Julie and just give you a chance to explain a bit more of your background and any of the relevant law that you think we should think about now.
Sure. As it probably says on the screen, my name's Julie Hughes, and I'm honoured and humbled to be here today. I really am. And I'm also honoured and humbled to be on Awabakal land and want to pay my respects to the traditional owners and all First Nations people. I noticed, Rachel, that you described yourself, which was very helpful. And I'm not sure if I want to describe myself this morning. I think I look a bit haggard, actually. But I am, my pronouns are she and her. I'm coming to you from home. And I have two little grandsons who are hovering somewhere in the recesses of the house with their grandfather. And so it's all fingers crossed at this end here. I had prepared a little bit of a spiel, but I've just decided to pitch all of that. It's always an unusual and slightly awkward task to introduce yourself and reduce it to some sort of pithy statement that's kind of a bit more about what you do than who you are. And as has been said, I'm a solicitor, and my background's in medical negligence and elder law, and I've worked at the university for a long time. I'm on the Mental Health Review Tribunal, and I'm currently working at the Older Persons Legal Clinic at the University of Newcastle. I'll explain a little bit about that for you in a moment. So they're the sorts of things that I do. But what ignites my passion is access to justice, to being able to use any position that I might have to speak up for people who need an advocate, because the legal system really is geared towards the well-resourced, and it can be a bewildering place to find yourself in the midst of a situation where there is potentially a legal solution, but you have no idea where to start. And at the University Legal Centre and at the Older Persons Legal Clinic, which is a part of the University Legal Centre. I guess part of our mission is to try and to step into the gap that is that power imbalance and just generally create more access to justice for people in this area. And because of that, I've had experience assisting and advising people from a diverse spread of backgrounds and a diverse spread of issues. I have represented a number of transgender young people in the family court and so on. And so my main space of working in practice is in those areas where people find themselves perhaps without resource and needing some guidance of where to start, where to go, what their rights are, and so on. The Legal Centre operates on a bit of a model where the students are part of the advice clinics and they work on cases and so on. And so really there is a win-win situation where students are being trained, they're being exposed to problems that they may not see in your usual private practice. And so they will see a lot of stuff that's happening on the margins, and then the community in exchange also gets a really good quality legal service that is entirely free. So the Older Persons Legal Clinic is geared towards persons who are over 60. And so this is a part of the Legal Centre, and Indigenous persons who are over 50. And we run advice clinics and pop-up clinics and so on, with the hope of not just helping people when they are in a poor legal situation, but being able to give advice so people don't find themselves in a situation of real dispute where they're having to deal with court processes and so on. But when often, not always, but often when I see people, they are bewildered and distressed and just not really knowing where to go. So I've been asked to come here to discuss predominantly employment and back to work issues. And it's been a real privilege to hear people's lived experience. And I feel very honoured to be able to and thank people for their candour in sharing their stories. My disclaimer is that I'm not an employment expert, but I'm across the issues around returning to work. I'm losing my voice. Or gaining employment, be it post-stroke or other illness. The thing is that the law in this area is really complex, and although it sort of boils down to a few key issues, I suppose, if you were talking about it simply, that employers will make reasonable adjustments to accommodate an employee so they can fulfil the inherent requirements of the job. It's easy to say that sentence, but that's not so simple as it sounds. You know, assessing what is reasonable, for example, can be fraught, as is assessing when a person can fulfill the inherent requirements of a position. You know, what is the job and what is simply how it's done? The difference between those two things can be difficult. And unfortunately, being a federation, we've got state and federal laws at play, and an employee has to wade through and work out in which forum they should make a complaint if they get to that point. And that's very difficult without legal assistance, and the timeframes in employment law are very short. So most often you've got 21 days to get in some sort of paperwork to some sort of body to to begin an investigation of your particular complaint. And
I had no idea about that. Which again, just in when there's systems that are designed for people who are well resourced and can act quickly, rather than considering, if somebody is considering lodging a complaint because there's a workplace dispute around a disability, you know, you're up against it in terms of your energy, time, resources, trying to, especially if it's something that's not easily articulated. I kind of jumped in here too, because what you were saying about reasonable adjustments, I think it's worthwhile pausing here just for a sec, if that's okay. I've worked as a, you know, a disability advocate in other spaces outside of stroke, and I feel like within stroke communities, it's maybe a new concept to think about yourself as a disabled person, and kind of what does that even mean? Emma and I had an interesting discussion about, do you diss the ability or get rid of the diss because you don't want to focus on all the negative things? We can talk about that more, but trying to define what's a disability that you live with is really important in being able to ask for a reasonable accommodation in a workplace. So what that means is that you are allowed to ask for an adjustment to your work. Like Julie was saying, the employer then needs to kind of work with you to decide what's reasonable. But things like part-time work, things like flexible work schedules in 2021, especially since they've been, you know, rolled out for people who possibly haven't needed them before. Able-bodied people have been able to access flexible work, part-time work, work from home because it was necessary. These kinds of reasonable adjustments are things that people living with fatigue, cognitive impairment, you know, physical impairments and pain as well, they're really important things. But how do you communicate those effectively to an employer without them thinking, oh, that means you're not going to be easy to work with? Rather saying, if I have these accommodations for my disability, I will be able to do my job properly.
And I think that that's true when you want anything of an employer, you know, whether it's a pay rise or whatever it is. You often need to give the employer something more than just, I need this. And so to be able to frame that in, given these particular accommodations, I will be able to perform the inherent requirements of my job, almost just turning it around a little bit, saying, putting it in terms of what you will be able to do, just given those accommodations, is a better way to put it. It's really interesting, isn't it, that we've all suddenly discovered that we can work flexibly when people who've been asking to work flexibly for a very long time have been told that they wouldn't be able to do their job properly. And suddenly we've all done our jobs. I've been working remotely since March 2020. And so this must be about the 1,000th Zoom type call. And so we've all discovered that it can be done. A further thing to mention is that when we're looking at sort of negotiating this difficulty around the legal system and the gap that's there where people just don't really know what to do and how to get help, particularly larger employers are really wised up in these areas, and they know they can't just overtly discriminate against someone based on that person's perceived limitations. So a wealth of time and effort goes into establishing legal processes that minimise the risks for the employer should they wish to, say, phase out an injured employee or avoid giving a job to a person with a disability. So already the resource is stacked, particularly for bigger employers, in that way. And there is real confusion around what needs to be disclosed by a person who's living with some sort of disability, and that's been raised already. And there are a few sort of legal issues around that. I'm sorry if you can hear little grandchildren bustling out the door on the way to their picnic right now.
That's completely fine.
Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. Okay, so there are a couple of issues. So about how and when to disclose. And as has already sort of been alluded to, a person may feel that they don't want to disclose something because either their symptoms are in remission or they don't consider any medical issues to be a disability, or they believe it doesn't impair their work performance. And a person in those positions, are quite entitled to not disclose. Everybody's different. And if for you it's important to not disclose those things, well, that is cautiously fine. But it may become a problem if, in fact, they do affect your ability to fulfill the inherent requirements of your job. The other thing that a couple of other things I just raise is that there can be problems if you haven't disclosed the nature of any limitations you might be experiencing. If later you go to make a complaint and say, well, I was discriminated against because of these particular issues, it's quite likely you'll be unsuccessful if the employer was never told about those particular issues. So I was reading a case where somebody was dismissed from their employment, going through the proper processes and stages on the basis of performance and so on. And then they brought a claim for unfair dismissal, alleging that they had been discriminated against because of their mental health problems. And the employer was able to say, we never knew you had mental health problems or psychological problems. And so we can't be said to have discriminated against you because we never knew. So that is a flip side of not disclosing that could be important. But as with all of these things, it's really a case-by-case basis. And there are other things like employment contracts and so on that might specifically state that you have to disclose certain things that could potentially affect your ability to do your job.
I feel like that's a really good place to just explore how you communicate, when you communicate things. Patrick Clemenson, hello. I popped his statement up on the screen here saying that he thinks many employers see making adjustments to meet the needs of disabled employees as an avoidable cost rather than a forward-thinking investment. Once you're in a job, if you've got a job, there are services like Job Access and Dylan Dre Steele, he actually works with an a disability employment support agency. I'm going to pop his comment up on the screen just so that you can see his name and look out for it. There are lots of different government-funded support services that can help you to work out what things you need, ask for them, and then we'll also pay for them. So Job Access, for example, if you're a wheelchair user and you need to have ramped access to a building, if you work in a building, they can actually pay for the ramp. But beyond the really obvious physical things, there are supports that they can help to fund, and they can kind of help with articulation, like help you to figure out how to speak about those things. I'm just wondering, Emma, if you have any experience with Job Access?
Yeah, I do. Multiple return to work supports that have helped me, and I think, in a way, because I present so physically, I was forced to disclose in a way, but subsequently I have been able to reap a lot of the access supports that I needed. Only recently, when I began working for the Sun Foundation, as we all had to work from home, things like my work setup, my lighting, my support chair, they're all things that were assessed and funded through Job Access, organised by my employer. So very much because I was able to disclose what my needs were and highlight, not really, I think the important thing disclosing, it's not all what the weaknesses and negativities about your disability. It's more about, what supports, what implementing them will mean for them in your work performance. And I know, like with my ataxia and pain, if I have a supported chair, I will perform a lot better. So I think, it's really evident to your employer how that will maximise your productivity. And I think that's where I think it's easy to get so stuck in the problems with things not being accessible and time frames, like Shirley mentioned, we had 21 days to lodge a complaint, and they're things that really against us. And I think the importance of focusing on what can be done within that time and within your capabilities. But yeah, definitely Jill had multiple things with Job Access, which have really helped me.
Yeah, and there are a range of other support services available to support people with job seeking. Those are valuable and we need more of them. I feel like from talking to lots of people, John, you'll have comments on this with your networks in the the Stroke Recovery Association, and Rachel, you've got some personal experience. Stroke isn't understood very well. So if you connect with a disability support, I'm using the wrong terminology, an agency that can help you with job seeking, and you happen to come across someone who really knows about stroke, then they might be particularly helpful. And it's important to kind of figure out, well, how do you communicate what your needs are to the agency so that they can tell you whether or not they have the skills to support you. It's not really easy.
Jill, I would also add there that in agencies, like you described, there often are advocates, like Julie was mentioning, someone who can really advocate for you and articulate what maybe you find difficult to articulate. So that understanding, but having that support to actually act on your behalf. There are times where I think all of us really feel vulnerable, and whether it's pain or fatigue or mobility issues, that really makes it more challenging, and having someone to advocate for you, so powerful.
Goes back to Julian. Many people about not really understanding stroke. Along the lines of what Rachel had said earlier, I actually don't remember in hospital anybody actually formally telling me I had a stroke from the medical community. I'm sure they probably did. I probably just blocked it out. But I actually remember my wife saying, you had a cerebral hemorrhage. Went on to say you had a stroke. I said, don't tell me I had a heart attack as well. I thought a stroke was a heart attack. And I'm sure I'm not the only person in the world who doesn't understand fully, or didn't at the time, what a stroke was. I do now.
Yeah. I remember going home and looking it up on the internet. What is stroke? What is aphasia? I had no idea.
Yeah, and things are changing. There is a lot more awareness of what stroke is in general, but perhaps we've still got a long way to go in terms of understanding what disability looks like, what stroke-related disability looks like, and otherwise just what disability looks like at all, so that you can be believed and it can feel like, how do we create safe workplaces where it feels like you can talk about what your needs are?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's probably easier to communicate that you need something physical, let's say you use the example of a ramp earlier, than to be able to communicate, I need to be able to take little breaks every so often. That's a more difficult concept, I think, to be able to get across to an employer.
I definitely would say, Julie, that the invisible effects of my stroke, like fatigue and pain and vision, are definitely more difficult to articulate, and I definitely am more likely to flag my physical disabilities because there is more of an understanding, and yeah, people, like I said in my presentation, can understand, manage, diagnose them quickly. It's when something's invisible, it's yeah.
And there's a fine line between making sure that you feel like you can tell people what you need, and then people having an expectation that it's your job to be educating them about the problem all the time. So if you're in a workplace and there's some support put in place, I'll use an example of a start time that's different to everyone else's. If you're expected to explain again and again and again why you actually can't make an 8 a.m. meeting because that doesn't fit in with the work practices that you need to follow because of your disability, it becomes exhausting and you end up feeling like you have to be whinging about it almost. That's kind of how it feels. And you have to remind them that you're not, the same or whatever else. It can be really tiring advocating for yourself like that and then expecting people to remind them, can you just remind me why that is, rather than just saying, no, I'm not available to 10. And that's just how it is because it's already been agreed on.
And I think, Jill, that return to work process is the long-term nature of it. I mean, I've been in my current workplace for over a year now, and they're so accepting of my disability and my needs, but in that acceptance of it, they've almost forgotten that it's normalised that I get tired and I've got pain, and it is up to me to flag it occasionally. And you don't want that to hinder or change how you relate to that person. So it doesn't go away.
Yeah. I interrupted you just before, Rachel. I'm not sure if the thought's still there.
Yep. No, I can't remember.
Got it.
I think just jumping from what you said there, Emma, too, the individual employer makes a difference. And so if you're working for a bigger employer, they may be better resourced and have more policies and so on in place around this area. But if you're working for a smaller employer, not only are there issues that they don't come under the same law as a larger employer. So if you work for somewhere with less than 5 employees, then they're not subject to the same strictures with respect to unfair dismissal and disability and so on. So that's an issue. But then the size of your employer will make a difference, but also just the individual workplace culture, the place where you are. So it's very hard to have sort of a blanket position because you're dealing with so many subjective issues.
How do you find those employees that are kind of like, I don't know, what's the word?
Inclusive.
Yeah, inclusive of those disabilities? Yeah. How do you know?
John, do you have any advice for people? I mean, it's pretty hard to find a job in this current climate.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think it is a difficult issue. I mean, I was in the, I guess, very lucky position. I worked directly for the CEO, and so there was a lot of support. And along the line, on the point of, do you tell your employer about your disabilities or not? I mean, mine came in an official report from a neuropsychologist. So that, they were told that I have cognitive loss, short-term memory loss, which I was happy about because the reality is I did. I didn't particularly accept it at the time. It took a long time before I could actually say I'm disabled. But they were there, and it was important that the employer knew about them, and the employer did make adjustments for those issues.
What I've really noticed across since COVID has made everyone it's made everyone adjust and adapt, and people who have never wanted flexible work practices or remote work before have had to jump in. And I've noticed that my disabled and chronically ill friends and colleagues are just superstars at this, because we've been doing it for a long time. Who are you going to call when you don't remember how Teams works or how, features on Zoom calls? Well, people who have been isolated and shut out of work and socializing using these tools for years, they know what to do. I think some of finding an employer who is going to support you is possibly easier right at the moment in some ways, harder in others. But we're really seeing that people who need these adjustments are also the people who know how to adjust, is what I'm trying to say. So maybe hopefully our conversation can do something to try and shift people's perceptions. I know, Emma, you've been employed to use your skills to advise, I can't remember which organisation, but advise on how boards should be more inclusive, because boards want diverse people on them.
Yeah. And I think that I guess the organisations that I've worked for are largely health, and so I think the understanding and empathy towards people with disability probably are, they're more aware of that. The organisation I work for is all about building people's capacity, and so therefore that's what they're about. So that's very much why they work with them. Our values are very aligned. And yet one of my roles is advising a non-disability workforce about employing people with disability and training them up to sit on boards across Australia. And at the moment, their platform and their workshops and their training is not inclusive or diverse. And so I'm basically doing that course with the I guess other lens of trying to think of ways that we could mitigate or navigate those barriers that I identified. So I think it's more that trying to put more known in the unknown for those people that find it's so confronting when you come to them saying, I've got a memory issue. Saying, yeah, I've got a memory issue, but I'm awesome at using Zoom, like Jill said. Then, that is a weakness, but look, with that, I can problem solve. I know how to get around that because I've done that for like 20 years. So
and that's just it, because you've been dealing with memory issues. I don't know you personally, but someone's been dealing with memory issues for all this time. They've got systems in place, and it's like, yes, I've got these memory issues, so I need you to be aware that if you just tell me something when you're walking past my desk, I am going to forget it. But if we use this system, I won't. I need to diarise it, and I won't.
For example, this course, this assessment of this course is in one big 90-minute online assessment, and I've suggested ways that we can break that down and extend times so it's more inclusive, and they're very receptive to that and will implement that. But they didn't know how it could look differently. So I think thinking what is possible and asking for it and giving them ideas is the way that hopefully we can start creating that diversity.
And could I just add to that? I think that it's really important, particularly for someone returning to work after stroke, to try to do that work with their employer at the early stage, because the reality is that from a legal perspective, once disputes arise and they become drawn out, by the time you get to a tribunal or a court or something like that, the relationship is so soured that return to work is probably nigh on impossible.
Yeah.
Just to give a little statistic about unfair dismissals generally, in the Fair Work Australia report from January to March this year, shows that 77.5% of all unfair dismissal applications were themselves dismissed. 22.5% of the applicants that of the 22.5% of the applicants that were successful, only 0.4% were reinstated. So that is a minuscule proportion, and sort of speaks to it's better to be trying to deal with things earlier rather than later, because even if you're successful at the end, the result is unlikely to be returned to work from a tribunal. You might get a payout or an apology and all sorts of things like that, but return to work after a drawn out dispute is very, very unlikely.
Julie, can I just add, when you said, and correct me if I've heard wrong, but you said that disclosing is better off to do earlier on. Is that's what you said?
Well,
it's probably beneficial.
I guess what I'm saying is every situation is different. Everyone's gauging what their individual employers like, and so on and so forth. But what I'm saying is, in terms of coming to some solution, you've got much better chance of doing that earlier when problems arise than leaving it, than getting to the point where you're finding yourself in a tribunal. Because
I ask that because I think particularly for a lot of the cohort that are really vulnerable and are at that early stage, or you can't speak, or like I know I couldn't speak for a few years, that that's where maybe enlisting an advocate is really important early on. There's things that you can put in place so it's not so overwhelming and daunting. I'm just thinking, if that is the case, maybe that's a good thing to do. Like when you've already got all these other emotional and physical pressures.
Yes, I would think so. Any sort of support with a well-informed advocate who can assist you would be really beneficial.
Yeah.
And there's a range of different organisations with skills and expertise. There are the Disability Employment Support Agencies, yes. There's also the Physical Disability Council of New South Wales. Now, when they were founded, they were geared towards people with physical disabilities exclusively, but now we understand there's intersecting needs that people have. And Adrian O'Malley, who was going to present on this panel today, but he's sick, he works with them. He's running a workshop next Tuesday morning online as part of this program. It's free. So he's a survivor of stroke and is presenting, also, running the workshop also with someone else who's got lots of experience in advocating. They're just going to talk about how you get skills in communicating your needs. What happens if you get it, if it's not successful the first time? What's another way to be influential? And also they know lots of different supports and agencies that you can tap into. I've put the link for that workshop in the chat. They're a non-for-profit. This isn't an advertisement that has any financial implications for us. But personally, I know Adrian's got some fantastic experience and skills, bit of a badass. You also can call Stroke Line. So the Stroke Foundation, it's a general advice line. depending on where you live, may be able to link you up with some physical services, or they can help you to navigate, find services and supports anywhere in the country. John, if you're going to give someone a take-home piece of advice in how to advocate for themselves, how to let people know actually that they're an excellent employee, what would it be?
That's an interesting question. Look, I think I'm trying to think about my own experience, and I don't think psychologically I'd come to terms with the fact that I had the disability, and that it would be a very, very long road to recovery. So I was actually glad that I had people like the neuropsychologist and CRS advocating on my behalf. But I with hindsight, it is about saying, look, this is what I could. So with that advice, you've got some information, what you can cope with and what you can't, and outlining that for the employer. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for a fall. So issues such as fatigue, not being able to multitask. If we can design a job that I can do with my disabilities, then I can succeed. If we set up a job that I can't do, then I'm not going to succeed. That makes sense?
Yeah. Rachel, do you want to weigh in at this point?
Yeah, I'd say don't give up. I mean, there's people that have had strokes and they lay in bed just wasting away. Don't give up. Get out there, apply for jobs, and, be an advocate to, disability. Yeah. Go for it.
There's so many things that I could say about the way that you conduct yourself in the workplace and the advocacy work that you do, Rachel. Julie, I want to check in to see, it's not a laughing matter. Just checking to see if I understood you correctly. I know about the older person's legal service. When I was working as a physio, I was able to connect some of my clients up, and it was fantastic. Was there also an avenue to get free legal advice as a younger person in Newcastle?
Yes.
Or
So the University of Newcastle has two things operating. And so the Older Persons Legal Clinic is a fairly new thing, a couple of years, but the General University's legal centre runs through university semesters, and it is staffed by very experienced and senior supervising solicitors with the students. And so that is available. They do great work. And I suppose next year it will be back to face-to-face. This year it's all been, phone calls and so on because of how things are. But there are other places as well. I mean, we've also got the Hunter Community Legal Centre in Newcastle, and they have telephone advice intake sessions 2 mornings a week, I believe. And then there's Law Access, Legal Aid, and the Fair Work Ombudsman as well are various places where people can go to get some assistance. People can also go to a private employment lawyer, but of course that's going to be expensive. And but of course you'd be getting someone who's quite expert in the field. With legal aid, there is legal aid technically available for these types of things. But when I looked it up this morning, I saw that there's a means test and a merit test, and there's an availability of funds test. That does legal aid have enough money? And the person has to be able to demonstrate that they are at social disadvantage. So quite a high bar to get any legal aid assistance in these sorts of areas.
Yeah, it's brilliant to have your insights and contribution here, because I know most people with disability aren't looking to try and sue people. That's not the intention of engaging with the legal service, but they want to know what their rights are, and we want to know how to speak about them, and basically just be able to go and be awesome in a workplace. And
That's
just
what
get
I'm
on with
saying. Always to get information. Information is empowering, and if you know what the legal position is early, and you get advice, then you can work from that place.
Yep, absolutely. Emma, do you have any last words of advice to people living with stroke who are in the workplace trying to get back into it?
I probably would echo what Rachel said, don't give up. I think having an amazing support network around you from the beginning, really, I think after hearing Julie particularly, having someone to advocate for you right through, particularly when you are at your more vulnerable points. But I think really, yeah, don't give up, and really there's more to you than your disability. And that's, I think, what you need to show to employees.
Yep. There's more to you than your disability, but your disability also isn't, it might be difficult to deal with, but it also isn't a deficit in itself.
No.
It's disability is a normal part of the human condition.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely, you're more than it, but that's part of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To feel like you are proud to be a disabled person and to own it, and that people understand that's you're part of that, and be proud of it. Don't see it as a weakness.
Yeah. Definitely right, Emma.
So I really want to keep this conversation going. We're going to end the broadcast in a second, but this needs to be one of an ongoing series of conversations about how survivors of stroke can advocate for themselves. But to me, it's just as important, maybe more important, is how do we actually see people with disabilities generally in society? And I hope that there's been bits and pieces that employers can take away from this discussion. It's worth the effort of working with someone to see how they can be accommodated. There's research evidence that shows that disabled people take less sick days than non-disabled people on average. Often, you know, I don't want to perpetuate unhelpful stereotypes, but usually by the time someone's fought for their right to get back into work, they're a very motivated and passionate employee. You know, everybody's different, but there's good research evidence as well as, you know, great reasons to employ people with disabilities. I just now want to bring onto the screen Raymond Gray. He's been behind the scenes today. He's a survivor of stroke. Here you come, Ray, who volunteers with us at the Stroke Research Register. He's been tapping buttons and helping out, just making sure that the production has run smoothly this morning and for months and working. Thank you so much for all your help.
My pleasure.
Oh,
and
and
yes, don't give up. Keep trying.
Yep. So I'll keep us all on screen, but end on thanking you so much for getting involved. It's been wonderful to see your questions coming in the comments. Patrick's saying there's power on this panel. We really appreciate that. And I'm very privileged to be surrounded by this bunch. The event isn't over. We are stopping. This session is over. But at 2:30 this afternoon, there's a research session. So there'll be some researchers available, doing live streamed presentations, but also available to talk to you. So you can, once we end this broadcast, I'm going to put a link in the chat to how you can book in to speak to a researcher on the telephone or jump in a group chat that looks a bit like this, but isn't live streamed, and throw your ideas around to do with stroke research. Tell researchers what you would like them to be researching, and share, have a cuppa online, and hopefully next year we'll have both online and in-person options. So thank you to the support of the City of Newcastle, to our Lord Mayor Nuatali Nelms, the University Research Institute, and all of you. We'll see you again this
Okay.
afternoon.
Thanks.
And yeah, it's been a blast.
Thank you.